needless to say, I think everybody knows her in Germany, and Cathrin. She was also candidate for the German parliament. Unfortunately, not among those MPs who is going to fight for digital rights and better regulatory environment. But I'm quite sure that from different position that she is going to take her part as well. Welcome, Anne-Cathrin. And also someone that is regularly joining us for the European Data Summit. He was last year with us in charge of AI and also Mr. Gaia X. I think I can call him like that. And I think if we think of industrial policy in Germany and all the cloud stories, I think Marco Alexander is quite known. We would like to talk about European sovereignty. I mean, we have the DMA, we have the DGA, DSA, and almost every talk is connected to data and digital sovereignty. You could listen to Johnny's remarks, thesis, critics. Basically, he is telling us enforcement matters, and he basically in charge the DigiJustice to do his job, and hopefully this will change in the near future. What are your thoughts listening to him? Who would like to start?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me, and good evening to all of you at home too. I think the most important part, and I am as a representative of the German Ministry of Economic Affairs, I think it's not my place to criticize either the Commission publicly nor certain member states. But I would be very, very grateful if we weren't talking about regulating American companies, but more about regulating European companies. What does that mean? The problem that I see is that all these megacorps and all these GAFAM, they come from territory outside of the European Union, and the European Union businesses, they are way too small to compete with them. And what I mean is not, I don't want to regulate the European small and medium businesses or the European digital giants that are in the making. I want European companies to be as competitive as they can, and I want them to be as big as they can, and I want them to be the pacemakers of data sovereignty and of data relations in the next years. And to get there, we need this regulation. Because this regulation is what, and in the end, emphasizes the worth of a level playing field. And if we can have a level playing field, and you have perfectly shown how enforcement is part of that, not only regulation, then we get into a situation where products and services from European companies are way more important for customers and way more important for citizens and are at the heart of the legislation. And I think that we are always fighting a war between the narratives. The first narrative is, look, we need to regulate first, and then by regulation we establish trust. And when we have established trust, people will buy European products. And we, in that never-ending hassle, we say, look, it's the other way around. We need products first from Europe, and then when people buy European products because they are competitive, then we can enforce European values, European regulations via these companies, and bring the results of the European superpower of regulation to all companies and people on the globe. And in the end, I think the truth is in the middle. We need to emphasize the opportunities, especially of small and medium enterprises, to be competitive. And you, as I said, you showed perfectly well that enforcement is part of it and not only regulation. But the thing is, by only regulating right now, we are always in a race, but we try to get the attention of global policymakers, and we try to keep up with GAFAM. But in the end, the GDPR has shown that if we regulate things, for example, California, they adopt regulation, but they don't take 400 pages, they take only 20. They take the best parts, and we lost the race for regulation again. So my point is, in the end, we need to make sure that the companies that we want to regulate come from Europe and not only from other territories. So in the end, we can foster our European values and foster European regulation through good business models and through good products that people actually want to buy and want to be using.
Thank you. And Cathrin, what are your thoughts?
I think you're very much right in saying the truth is in the middle. I think you both have very, very good and important points on this. And maybe to be a bit optimistic, I think it's super important that we as society, as European societies, finally have these talks and talking about what does sovereignty means for us, what do we want, what do we need, and all of this is still pretty new, you know, this whole digital sphere, having so much data, being able to process so much data, and so I wouldn't be that pessimistic in saying we're way behind, so we are still learning. And I think when it comes to regulation and these talks we need to have as societies, what do we want, how can we put this into regulation? Now I lost what I wanted to say.
But maybe to add, maybe to thinking of the last crisis, everybody has noticed that the market capitalization of GAFAM has grown. Well, we are talking all these years about data and digital sovereignty. So I'm wondering, are we on the right way, on the right direction, and how long will it take?
Yeah, that's, I think, there where I lost what I wanted to say. I think we need to become way more flexible in our regulation. So when I look at the GDPR, for example, it took too long, way too long, to discuss what we want. And now we see it's not fitting anymore to the environment we're having currently. And as you said, it's few pages too long when we look at California, and we need to adapt, I think, quicker to current movements, to developments in society. And I think it's regarding all processes we have in politics. We need to become more flexible and adapt to current changes.
Johnny, are you optimistic that we are on the right way?
It's hard to be optimistic. I am becoming tired because this has been going on a long time and it's not moving in the right direction. Let me say a word or two about the idea of companies and this, you know, this idea that the industry might produce a solution. I remember testifying on behalf of my last employer at the US Senate and telling them, we here in America look at the GDPR as an enabler of innovation. And if we had a USA GDPR, which is based ultimately actually on American principles from the 70s, upstarts like us could compete with the people who have taken all and are now causing trouble in the market. So the law as an enabler, I would be hesitant to dismiss it, and we didn't when I was in industry. The second thing about the California, there are two pieces of law you're probably thinking about. I was a little bit involved in that. You know, the first one is ineffectual, and that's why they have another one. And it's reasonably long, actually. And it's pretty closely based on some of the GDPR, and I think there are reasons why they weren't able to get in more. There was a negotiation process. But this idea that the GDPR is somehow outmoded, if it's outmoded now, it's not because it was introduced in, in the last few years. The principles are based on the principles from 1995, and they are completely technologically neutral. So I haven't seen a part of the GDPR that I could really credibly imagine is outmoded or that the document is too long. It's pretty easy to read, and for anyone who doesn't want to read the whole thing, it's all summarized in Article 5, which is half a page. Any business that reads Article 5, the principles, and does those things is pretty close to where they need to be. I know there's detail, but this is not rocket science.
maybe if I can re-emphasize my point, it's not about the length of the actual document. It's about the complexity of the document, and it's about the complexity of the regulation and the imposed effects on small and medium businesses if they want to achieve something with the data. Bitkom lately presented a survey where they said, look, we have been talking to people and companies, and they said 90% of them said they have been actually dissolving projects because they were afraid of coming in conflict with the GDPR. I don't know about the big American companies, but they seem to reign supreme still. So I don't see them to take the same amount of cautiousness towards GDPR than small and medium businesses, because they are affected by it. And if they are sued, they are in a very bad position. And big companies can afford to be sued. And actually, they can afford to be sued because they are not actually the rules are not enforced. So what my point was is, if we already have the point of view of regulation as solving the problem, then we forget about the business and the solution and the services side. And what I try to achieve with my work, and other people in other countries try to achieve with their work, is that we get into a situation where European companies are as strong as the companies that are not from Europe, and so we can compete and then export our values and actually the GDPR by companies that actually adhere to them.
Let me agree with you on one essential thing, which I think is implicit in what you're saying. The failure to enforce the law that we have, the GDPR, has definitely advantaged the big players, unquestionably, and it has disadvantaged, local football teams. GDPR is being thrown around by people who don't know and who it doesn't really matter too much with, as a thing. And yet it's being theatrically ignored in an exquisite theater with lots of consultants and legal fees by the big players, but they're not delivering on the substance. It comes down to the enforcement question.
We haven't agreed the questions, but I would like to use this opportunity that I have and Cathrin and to put this discussion in actual context. Do you believe that maybe the new government, in the context of the new data strategy or whatsoever, can do something in this respect in order to have better enforcement, to have the feeling that we have back control to our data? What's your feeling or opinion on this?
I really hope they'll do that. So when it comes to enforcement, I think we have a problem here in Germany that we have 17 data authorities.
16 plus 1.
Yeah. 16 plus 1. And they often have different opinions. And I think this is a big problem. And I think in the coalition treaty, they said they want to institutionalize the Data Commissioners Conference. And I think we need to find a way to make a consistent, coherent ruling so that companies have the security that when the data commissioner of North Rhine-Westphalia, for example, says something, that it's valid in whole Germany. And so, as you said, we have a lot of companies here in Germany who are simply afraid of the GDPR, and that's a very, very big problem, and they don't want to do something. And yes, maybe it's some short paragraphs, but what I hear from a lot of lawyers, and I'm a big fan of the GDPR in general and data protection, is that it's way too complicated. And you mentioned Bitkom, and Bitkom, I think they made a survey in the beginning of the GDPR where they asked companies if they adapted the GDPR completely. And I think there's no company here in Germany who says, even the small and medium companies, that they completely adapted to a law. And so there are some problems with the GDPR. And my party, the Free Democratic Party, they want to have new discussions on this. I'm sometimes a bit afraid that they want to lighten data protection. So I hope they will improve enforcement and that companies can adapt to it. And I also really hope that the new government will talk more about how we can use data. So talk more about data politics, policies, and not only about protection. And as I said, I think data protection is very important, but we need to talk more and broader about how we can use data as a society in general, not only as businesses, for example.
you would like to add, please?
Yes, being a government representative right now, I am not really yet aware of the position I am about to represent because the government is still in the making. But I see there is that I have the feeling that there is a very seldom opportunity here, and this is each and every one of us is a citizen, and we are a customer. And the thing is that the citizens wants to protect his data, and the customer wants to buy a convenient product. And sometimes these things come. There's citizens that do not want to share their data with, for example, their insurance companies. But on the other hand, they buy products of that track their life science, their life science, and track their pulse and all these things. Data which they never would share with their insurance companies, but they share it with American companies. And as long as people have these two hearts beating within themselves, and we do not really get these together, bring these together, and make this a coherent approach, like you, Ann-Kathrin, said, then we still have a very narrow approach towards legislation and a very narrow approach towards really convenient products.
Thank you. We can have also questions from the audience, so please get ready. In the meantime, I would like maybe to make a small remark when it comes to the enforcement issue. We can't complain that much that enforcement doesn't work, because when we think of all the competition cases and all the fines in the last years, obviously it doesn't hurt. So what if we have even enormous fines by data protection authorities that won't change the picture that much? I'm again trying to come back to the original position, how to achieve our European approach and sovereignty in
fines are not it. If you can have a dissuasive fine, great, but clearly the fines are not dissuasive. The enforcers have the power to level these fines, and that's all very well, but much more important is that they have the power to go into any organization, having conducted an investigation and done so lawfully. They can go into any organization and compel or get a court to compel that organization to stop doing what it's doing with the data. There is no company, no matter how big it is, that would not be subject to that. That's the thing the companies fear, and that's all that matters.
Okay, do we have maybe questions from the audience? Yes, please. First, let's start there, then Professor Kerber. Please introduce yourself. Or Professor Kerber first. Okay.
Ryan, I like very much your point, but I'm asking myself whether you are too optimistic in regards to GDPR. Because you said it's a problem with the Irish Data Protection Authority. And I'm not sure whether the enforcement would be much better if the Irish Data Protection Authority would work well and would work as well as all other data protection authorities in Europe.
Oh, so I didn't say that.
No, is it not the problem that the whole the entire enforcement system of the GDPR has really defects? Do we not need a European data protection authority which is as powerful as the European Commission in competition policy, and therefore a centralized agency for really dealing with the big digital platforms?
I have an answer, and then I'm going to give the second answer. The second answer is I don't know, but let me give the first preamble to that. First, I'm not suggesting that the Irish are massively worse than the rest. It's just that Ireland matters so much. I don't want to embarrass any enforcers, but there aren't too many shining examples. I actually can't think of a shining example that I can give you right now. So, as individual authorities, there are problems to go around, but Ireland is the one that matters right now the most. Second, this idea about taking that problem of an enforcer that isn't doing its job and moving it somewhere, it reminds me of Ireland and the problem of the Catholic Church, when in a parish it might turn out that there's a priest who parents are complaining that the priest is molesting children, And it turns out that the church's solution is to move that priest to a different parish. They don't deal with the problem. Whether the enforcer is in Brussels or in Dublin may not matter too much. And let me give you some examples. If the Commission, and you're talking about DG Comp, if that's your example of success, you have a different view of the market than I have. Maybe you're thinking of ENISA in cybersecurity. You know, there aren't many brilliant examples, correct me if I am wrong, of this working when you move it to Brussels either. So one way or another, we need to get an enforcer that can do its job wherever the hell it is. We need to deal with that problem. But we can deal with it very neatly now by fixing the Irish one now. And in our recommendations to the government, and this has also been backed up by a cross-party recommendation from the Irish Parliament and Senate Justice Committee. So 18 different recommendations, but one of them is an urgent review, independent review, to reform and strengthen that organization and figure out what's going wrong. And second, reform the leadership by appointing 2 additional commissioners at the top. That would help move things, I think. And maybe other things are necessary too.
Okay, one more question, please.
Thank you, Wolfgang Dierker. I work for Apple, and I'm very grateful for you to setting up this event. This feels like the second last chance to meet people in person, so really grateful for you to set this up. So I work for a company that does not sell data, but sells devices, and the most of the revenue we make is from selling devices. Sometimes it feels a little bit like comparing apples and pears, no pun intended, when you put the company into the GAFA category. But that aside, I wanted to build on Marco Alexander-Breit's statement on regulating European companies, as you put it, meaning creating regulatory conditions for European companies to grow, to innovate, to provide values, and also in line with European values. So thinking of the Apple App Store, obviously, we continue to provide a platform that helps European and German developers to grow. We have thousands of developers, hundreds of thousands of jobs that are built upon this platform, and there will be unintended consequences, we fear, from the DMA. But the question I wanted to ask is, somewhere in between the discussion of the GDPR and the DMA, I may have got lost, but what are your concrete suggestions to do in order to get European companies to grow? So what are the regulatory conditions that need to be changed in order for European companies to grow, innovate, and create values? I may have missed, but I would be really curious to hear a little bit more detail on how exactly we have to do that, because I think it's totally right.
I think the question is directed to me, right? So yes, thank you first and foremost. We could talk a lot about Apple and its business practices, and especially the App Store and how it impedes or benefits companies that want to bring their applications to the market. But taking that, there's 3 things I think are very important. The first one is taking into account small and medium enterprises, and we have seen it with the AI Act that's coming out, that what has been getting out yesterday evening, that small and medium enterprises are being taken into account, especially taken into account. That's, from our point of view, one of the most important things. The second thing is that we need to make sure that European companies too have the access to data, which means that as long as especially cloud services are provided by only big corporations, so-called hyperscalers, and then the data rivers, they only flow towards the big ones. What we need to make sure is that the small ones can even access that data, that small companies from Europe have a level playing field when it comes to cloud storage and app solutions, which means in the end that we need to make sure that lock-in effects are no longer working. This and the access to data to make data on a voluntary basis more achievable and more have a broader access is the goal of Gaia X, for example. That's the second thing we are doing. The third thing we are doing is that we try to make sure that, and especially in Germany, colleagues of mine are tomorrow here to explain the German competition laws, and that we want to make sure that the level playing field is especially, there is a very strict approach within Germany, especially towards bigger companies and abusing their market power. So in the end, there is a lot of leverage that we have and a lot of measures that we can take, but they need to be coordinated. And then, as I said, it's just not doing this and doing that. It's taking into account that people make business decisions. People buy things. And if I don't take the people serious because I reduce them to citizens and forget that they are customers, then I make it wrong. And if I reduce them to customers and forget that they are citizens, I make it wrong too. I do it wrong too. And in the end, we need to combine these few perspectives, and then the regulation will be a good one.
Having in mind the time restrictions that we have as well, I will start the sentence, and Anne-Cathrin, please bring it to end. In order to be sovereign, we have to do what?
I hate this game so much. So in order to be sovereign, we have to do.
Yes, in order, I mean, you have inspiration also from the representative of Apple, because this is really a legitimate question. We are doing a lot when it comes to DMA and GDPR, but what actually we have to do finally in order to have European companies grow and to achieve more when it comes to sovereignty?
I always think about that I have to reply to your email still. No, what we have to do, I think, in order to support European companies, that was what Marco said, we as state, as a government, need to support these companies, for example, in being their biggest customer. We saw it with BioNTech, for example, here in Germany, and we can do this in the same way with tech companies, for example. We saw it that the German Bundeswehr, the armed forces, they bought a messenger service, an open source one, from a European company, and they're using it now as an internal messenger service. And I think these are, like, we need to identify what do we want. As I said, where do we want to be sovereign, and then support European companies who are producing products based on our values, such as open source software products, and then be their biggest customer and support them.
Hashtag European champions. Industry strategy. Okay.
I just want I want to second the part on open source. It's way more important than we think.
Okay, Johnny, please finish my sentence. In order to be sovereign, you told us a lot. Maybe your final remarks.
Something like 15 years ago, I wrote a book on the history of the internet, and I was about to say, fight a big war, because that's where a lot of the tech sector ultimately has its roots in all sorts of surprising ways. But another way to put that is big projects like Gaia-X. And it's the power of the public sector purse, of public procurement, but also to set up things like Fraunhofer Institute and so on, to run big things that innovations can roll out of. I think that is potentially, looking at the US example, that's certainly where their dynamo came from. It came from the state, amazingly.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the discussion with you.
Thank you.
And we continue with the so-called Google hearing, hoping that Louis Crofts is with us, at least virtually. Is he with us? Not yet. Let's wait a couple of minutes. Many thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to meet you.